How you guys doing? I feel like I said this last time, but this morning might be a little bit different to what you're used to at church. We're going to worship a bit more in a minute. I'm going to read a psalm to you real quick, Psalm 95, if you want to go there. Psalm 95 says, "Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Come before him with thanksgiving and exalt him with music and song, for the Lord is the great God, the King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care." I want you to hear this little portion starting at verse 8 here. It says, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Messiah in the desert. Where your fathers tested and tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years I was angry with that generation. I said, these are a people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my way. So I declared an oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest." In this end portion of this scripture from verse 8, God is talking to David about the Israelites who were in the desert for 40 years and saw what God did. They saw the miracles that he performed. They saw the impossible things that he did at every turn. Yet still, their hearts remained hard. And because their hearts were hard when God spoke, there wasn't space in their hearts for his voice to enter into. And because of that, they never entered God's rest and his peace and his life. See, when God speaks into our hearts, if there's space in our hearts for his voice to land, his voice will draw us into a place of peace and rest. I think one of the main reasons that the Israelites' hearts became hard is this. I want to take you back to verse 3. It says, "For the Lord is the great God." That's a big G. "The great King above all gods," little g. Verse 7 says, "He is our God." I think one of the reasons that the Israelites' hearts became hard is because they allowed God to become a God, a small g. And they didn't let him be their God. To worship is to exalt God above all other gods, whilst using our whole being, our mind, our will, and our emotions. This verse says, "Come, let us bow down before God. Let us be loud in our worship. Let us sing with our voices." And just for a moment, I want us to worship Jesus. You know, God doesn't need our worship. Do you know that? God's not insecure in himself. He's not confused about who he is. He doesn't need us to worship him. But I've realized that there's something that happens to me when I make it all about him. There's something that so profoundly happens inside of me when my eyes are on him. And I understand that we come into this place and sometimes we bring our needs and we bring our wants and we come to Jesus with that stuff, and so often that's me. And God so graciously meets us in that place. But I think there's something so profound about when we worship God without an agenda. Not to get something, not because we need something, but because we've caught a glimpse of who he is. We've seen who he is. I wrote this down in my notes. I think there's something powerful that starts to take place when a group of people come before God and begin to exalt him. Not so that he can do something for them, but because they've caught a glimpse of who he is. There's something that happens to me when I make it all about him. I don't want God to be another God. I don't want him to be another G. I want him to be my God. I want God to sit on the throne of my heart. And when we worship, God sits on the throne of our heart, and there's no space on that throne for other gods, for the God of self. When we worship ourselves, and we worship our own abilities and our own efforts, there's not space for comparison and insecurity when God is sat on the throne of our heart. So I just want to invite you to stand a second. My amazing friends, Anna and Ed, are going to lead us. I just want you to close your eyes for a moment here. Now, I was one of those guys a few years ago in this church, and God just got a hold of my heart, and from a very young age, I've just had this dissatisfaction with just doing church. And this morning, I just want you to let go a little bit of what it should look like. Because I believe that if you're in this building this morning, you're going to meet the King of Kings, Jesus. So I just want you to close your eyes and begin to focus on Jesus and begin to tell him how much you love him. With your words. It says, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. We can be loud about our worship. Let us come before him, right up to his feet. Let us bow down in worship. So as Ed and Anna begin to sing, I want you just to do that, to get loud, to engage your mind, your will, and your emotions, and to exalt Jesus, not for a purpose, but just because he's worthy, because you've seen who he is. Now in Colossians 3, verse 3, it says this. You died. That's the start of the verse. Galatians says that you were crucified with Christ. Paul says the part of you that died was your old self. It was your old man. That when you become a Christian, there's a part of you that has to die. Paul says it in Romans 6 a lot of times, you are dead. But the good news is that you didn't just die with Christ, you were also resurrected with Christ. And you have a new person, a new self. Paul says that you're a whole new creation. Corinthians, it says you're a whole new creation. We have this phrase, you're born again. We're resurrected into this new life. And now our person exists of this. We live in perfect communion, in perfect union with Jesus. There's no separation. That's our new person. Colossians says you died, and now your life, who you are, is only found inside of Jesus. You can't know a single thing about yourself until you find Jesus. Jesus is the context of humanity. And when you see him, you start to see yourself. Not when you see church or Christianity or more religion, but when you see Jesus, you see yourself. And when you start to know him, you start to know yourself. I'm not talking about knowledge like theoretical knowledge. There's this word yada in the Old Testament, which is to intimately know, to experience. That's the sort of knowledge that we're being led into this morning. The experiential knowledge. When we experience the person of Jesus, we start to see who we were created to be. And we stop doubting ourselves. And we stop fearing what other people have on their lives. We stop comparing ourselves. We stop being insecure about who we are. When we see Jesus, we see who we were made to be. We need to be a Jesus-obsessed people. Not a church or religion, but a Jesus-obsessed people. So just keep your eyes on him for a moment longer, on Jesus. This might be a totally new thing, but Jesus is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. He's the King of Kings. He's wonderful, and he wants to sit on the throne of your life. He wants to show you who you were made to be. He wants to set you free from fear. He wants to set you free from comparison and insecurity. Just don't focus on me. Just focus on him for a moment longer. There's people in here that God's starting to, you're feeling something inside of you, something that feels a little bit awkward. God's doing some stuff inside of some people and it feels kind of awkward. And that's God. God's going to do a deep work this morning. You guys can take a seat real quick. Stay in this place. Aren't these guys awesome? Anna, you're amazing. You know, one of the reasons that I love to get people up here to do stuff and to share with me is, for one, just because they're incredible, right? But also because I believe that God's changing our perspectives to no longer think that God wants to move through one person with a microphone, but that God is wanting every person to be empowered to live out what this Bible says, to live out what Jesus says. It's no longer about one person that has an encounter, but whole bodies of people that have met Jesus, that have experienced Jesus and are full of him, right? And the qualification isn't having a good personality or having charisma, right? Jesus isn't looking for people that are even specially talented, right? He's just looking for people that say yes, that say, I'm willing to be more full of you than full of myself. I'm willing to be more aware of you than aware of me. I want to be possessed by you, Jesus. You know, Gideon was a man who God said was a mighty man of God, even though he kind of really wasn't at first. And God told him to do this thing, told him to go to war with these people. And it says that God's spirit came upon him. And a better translation for that portion of scripture is that God put Gideon on. God wrapped himself in Gideon. I think God's looking for people like Gideon who say, God, yeah, you can put me on like a glove. You can put me on like a glove. I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the strategies, but you can put me on like a glove, God. Do whatever you want to do with me. I want to show you a little video in a moment. But me and Maria, this is my wife, Maria, she's amazing. We've been doing this project on a house. I was a carpenter before, well, still am a carpenter. Yeah. Yeah, still am a carpenter. And we're working on this house, and we've got scaffold all around our house. And where's Finn? Finn, he's the best brickie in Bath. He's my man. And Steve, Steve's a good laborer. And we're working on this project, and we've got scaffold all around my house, and I took a chimney down, and so there's tiles off my roof, and everything's a bit everywhere. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this wind that happened recently. It's literally like, on a real, like, I never wake up in the night, like never. like Maria like gets so mad at me because I just fall asleep in films and stuff, and that's me. But I woke up 2 nights in a row in the middle of the night and just like led in my bed, just like so afraid that like my roof's gonna like fall off or something. And like I could hear this sheet like flapping like so loudly outside my window, and I heard like something smash downstairs. I was just like convinced I was gonna wake up and like everything was gonna be on the floor. So irrational, but that's what it felt like. So this is a little video. There's no particular reason I'm gonna show this video, just want to show you. Nigel showed a video, so I wanted to show a video. So this is a lifting. Was it Steve the caterpillar, isn't it? This is the caterpillar, right? This is how you lift heavy steels.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's called the caterpillar.
That's the caterpillar, all right? So we lifted those stills up into my loft, and with big RSJs, lifted them up. So yeah, just want to show you that. There's a reason, yeah. I think you got a reason for that? Oh, I thought you were going to interpret that. Yes, so I was lying in my bed, and it was pretty irrational, because when I woke up, I was like, yeah, there's literally nothing wrong, like nothing happened. But I started to think, and this might sound super spiritual, but I was lying in my bed, and I started thinking about how Jesus slept on a boat. Like legit, like it wasn't a Titanic boat or like a big cruiser boat. Like I'm imagining like a small boat, and Jesus is led out asleep whilst there's a storm all around him. I'm like, what? Like I can't even sleep when there's like a bit of flapping outside my house. And I started thinking about it, and how as Christians, so often we can be self-focused, and we can be focused on what we can bring to a situation, and we can be focused on the right thing to say and the right theology and all that stuff, and how Jesus was just so focused on his Father all the time. And I started thinking about, it was probably that reason that he could sleep on a boat, because his focus was on the Father at all times. I felt like God said to me that if you want to stay stable, if you want to last, then you have to be focused on me, focused on Jesus. Jesus is the theology that will last throughout all ages. The verse in Hebrew says, Jesus was the same yesterday, today, and forever. Jesus needs to be the center of our focus. I was reading C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis says, we need to be less obsessed with, knowing about Christianity, and more obsessed with thinking about the Christ, right? I'm going to tell a story in a minute. One of Faith Reed, who's now Barnet. She's awesome. I'm going to tell a story about her in a moment. But I really believe that there's some people this morning that you've kind of been doubting whether this God thing's real. You've kind of been unsure about whether there's something in this. You're on this journey of questioning whether you really want to go ahead with following Jesus. And I believe that there's some divine encounters that are going to set up this morning. Even people that know Jesus, God's going to open your eyes to see like, oh, that's who you are. You're so much bigger than what I thought. Experience Jesus. Believe God's raising up a Jesus people. A Jesus people. People that get sold out on Jesus. Why don't you just close your eyes real quick? I want you to think for a moment what your life would look like if you got your identity solely from what Jesus says about you. Have a think about it. What would it look like? How would you interact with people? You know, God makes this promise to a number of people in the Old Testament, to Moses and to Joshua and to Gideon and to a few people, and he says this: I'm going to be with you. I'll be with you. Don't worry, I'll be with you. Joshua is at the end of Exodus, is with God, and he says, not Joshua, Moses says to God, I actually don't want to go any further unless you come with me. Like, I'm not game to go any further and lead these people if you're not with me. I can't do it. And God says, don't worry, I'm going to be with you. I'll be with you. And that promise is always in relation to him asking these people to do something that's totally impossible. He asks his people to do something that's impossible, and then his promise is his presence. I'll be with you. We're all supposed to live lives that are impossible without Jesus. Not just in stature and in size, but so much deeper than that. That our focus is not on what we don't have, but on him, and then we forget about our lack and our limitations. When our eyes are on him, we forget about what we don't have, and we start to realize who's with us. We start to realize what's in us. See, I don't want to just be impressive to people. It makes me scared when I start going down that road. You know, Paul says in Corinthians, I didn't come to bring you wise and persuasive words, though he could have. He could have brought a good preach. He could have brought something deep and profound. He said, I didn't come to do that. What I came to do is to reveal to you the power of God. And I realized that I'm not supposed to just be impressive to people, that I want to become someone that when people meet me, they meet Jesus. And you can't do that unless you encounter him first. I want God to make an impression on me. That's why when I get before God, I say, God, I want to know you. I want to know you. I want to be your friend. I want to know who you are. You know, Faith preached about, was that 6 years ago? 5 or 6 years ago. And she preached a short message. I'm going to try and do it good. It was amazing. I was sat around where Jill is, Jilly Barton, and she preached about how when she was younger, she used to have long hair that covered her eyes. You can correct me if this is wrong. She used to have longer hair that covered her eyes, and she used to kind of hide behind her hair because she had, because she was shy and she kind of had insecurities about who she was, and she used to hide behind her hair. And then she went to Toronto. And when she was in Toronto, she told this story about how she encountered Jesus and she saw his eyes. And it makes me cry every time I think about it, that she saw the eyes of Jesus. And after she saw the eyes of Jesus, stuff began to change in her life. She stopped hiding behind her hair, and now she's a hairdresser. I think that's awesome. But I remember hearing that, and I remember honestly going home and saying, God, I want to see your eyes. I want to see your eyes. I've never seen your eyes. We have to get hungry about experiencing Jesus. We have to get hungry about knowing him. Are you hungry? Because if you're not, you can just ask him. If you're not hungry, you can just say, God, I want to be hungry. I don't feel it, but I want to be hungry. I ask that a lot. We have to be a people that hunger after experiencing Jesus. I'm sorry, I know this message is super simple, but it's what I got. That when you know Jesus, it changes everything. You realize you don't have to try anymore. You're trying so hard to do all the right things, and then you see him, and you realize it all makes sense. So if the band could come up. I want to create a space before we leave this morning for some of you, maybe all of you, and myself to again surrender to Jesus. I feel there's people in here who relate to that fact that I've been self-focused. My focus has just been on me. Or other of you have felt like I said before, I'm not really sure if this thing's real anymore. It's not really working for me. Christianity's not really working for me. And God's inviting you to give your whole life to him. Not just part of it, but your whole life. And so often I encounter people that say, yeah, I don't really know if this thing's working for me. I'm like, have you surrendered your whole life? Have you given him your whole life? Because it won't work if you don't. It won't work if you've given parts of you. He wants your whole life. He wants all of you. So I just want to invite you to stand again. You know, when I was younger, some of you are going to laugh at this. And I know who's going to be as well. Jacques Miche will be one of them. When I was younger, my dad is awesome, and he's a farmer, and he's a gardener, and my grandparents are farmers. When I grew up, I wanted to be a farmer. And then I started writing poetry, and I became some sort of rapper. So I was the farmer rapper. And then I went to become a carpenter, so I became a carpenter, farmer, rapper. And then I went to Bethel and became a carpenter, farmer, rapper, pastor, and all that stuff. And now I want to write books. There's so much stuff that I'm passionate about, but one thing I realize is that it's only Jesus that can give me my identity. If I go any other place for identity, for security, any other place, then I fall short. That it's only in him that I find it.